right, which is going to be, your third eye, third hand, third foot, right? Your third foot, the easiest way to think of it is being soulful. It is very deep. It's about your soul. And the deepest waters in your body, right, is your saliva, because it is yours and you swallow it, right? And saliva goes deep, not just because it goes down, because it's pervasive and it goes all the way through you. So when you're thinking about soulful waters and you're thinking about being the frog at the bottom of the well, or, any myth that has to do with going deep, right? You're dealing with your soulfulness, and we call that your third foot, right? Because eventually when, you're scared, you'll pee in your pants, right? And when you make progeny, it's your soul eventually, right, through your virility, moves into other. So, this is the waters of soul. Other waters of soulfulness is your blood, is your sperm, but the Taoists say that the most soulful water is saliva. So I like that. Second floor, which is about third eye, third hand, third foot, so we're talking third hand. The third hand is your spirit, and that is the spiritual narrative. So that was my segue to get into what I want to just say about thanking you all, because when you want to work on your soul, that is very personal. And that's why when you understand that your body is your instrument and soulfulness is about being in a body, because all of a sudden you wake up and go, oh my God, it's me. And you have to swallow all of that. Well, your soulfulness is a personal narrative. And that's why it's, it's your saliva and you're swallowing. But your spiritual nature is communal. And that is when you learn how to play well with others, right? And to build spirit, right, is really when you want to play with your soul. The character is tenacity, right? So souls are very tenacious. They want to stay alive, right? And they find a way, and you have to really know how to dig the root game. But the spirit wants applause, right? And so to be really joyful and to have a good spirit is really to be applauded. And you get applauded when you know how to play well. Right? And that's why soulfulness is a lot of you getting these insights and learning. But the spiritual narrative is always communal. And that's why you build spirit, like team spirit, right? But you build soulfulness alone, you build spirit with others. And that's why spirit is very communal. And to have a spiritual narrative is always on that second floor, right? Because, well, that's not true. If you want the spiritual narrative on the first floor, it's tribal. And it's soulful in that it is the tribe game of sex. But, to build the spirit is really to be in time and space, right? In the moment of feeling, playing, love, right? So when you want to build spirit, you're playing second floor, right? And the waters of the spirit, right? Because I don't lose my theme, right? Is the ocean, right? And that's why when you build spirit, you play with lithium. And that's why knowing how to go to the ocean, knowing how to breathe. Breathing is a spiritual narrative. And the breath, what you're really trying to suck in is the breath of the planet, which is lithium, which is oceanic. So when you go to the top of the mountains, you breathe, you pick up ions. When you go to the ocean, breathe, you pick up a lot of lithium. Makes you buoyant, right? And that's what you're looking for, a spirit that is buoyant, that is concentrated and radiant, and there are formulas to achieve these things, right? So let's go to the third floor for a minute. On the third floor, right, you're dealing with third eye. So this is your third hand, and your spiritual narrative is so much based on how do you handle it? How are you going to shake hands? How are you going to handle each other? How are you going to play with things? So technique. And that's why to play games well, you learn the rules. It's technical, right? And then, so this is something that I really like for me. I know that because I'm very smart and have a very good depth, and I, my soul is very tenacious. But to build spirit is to know how to play with others. And what you learn is that when you play well, you get to play with people who play well. Right? Because in tennis, good players don't play with lousy players, right? Not because they don't like them, but because it's not a good game, right? And Leela is divine play, and what you're learning is really how to play without losing your mind, how to play and get the applause, how to play and feel the joy, right? Because eventually, I'm just dividing it up into this thread, but eventually the game is a fractal game, and it's a hologram. So every piece of you is soulful, is spirited, and the third floor, which is mindful. So let's just move to third floor for a minute, right? So the waters of the third floor. If you know that the waters of the bottom floor is saliva, and you know the water of the second floor is the ocean, which is why when you play hard, you sweat salt, and when you cry, it's salt. It's all second floor, our ocean, our breath work, and everything you're pulling in prana, right, is the minerals. And the biggest minerals, if you're depressed, is go to the ocean, because you'll suck in so much lithium that eventually you're buoyant, right? So it's not a guess, right, what goes on each floor. Waters of the third floor is the clear mountain waters, right, that you want to drink. Okay, so that is like, so say you're going very deep in your bottom of the well, and you swallow your saliva, but eventually you get dry, right? Well, at the second floor, you're playing at the ocean and you get hot, right, and dry. Well, don't drink ocean water and don't drink well water, right? And that's when you have to know how to go to the third floor, right, and get a clear glass of fresh water, right? And that is the grace of the universe waters that rains down, and you first find them on top of the mountain, and it's through those streams that eventually it comes down the mountain. So in some ways, I've just started giving you the big theory game, which is to know. Because if you know, then you can use things to your advantage. So if you know, you're going to have to swallow it, because that's your aloneness and soulfulness. And then if you want to find real joy, you're going to have to understand communal and playing well, and also planetary, because eventually we're going to play this whole thing that, it's not just playing with people, it's playing with everything, right? And then, of course, the top floor is going to be the mind. So opening the mind, right? So 3 characters. I gave you the character in water, right? Character of saliva, character of ocean, and character of clear mountain waters, right? So let's talk about it as soil, right? Because so much of practice is divide and conquer, know things, and then put it all together. So, the asana, everybody, I'm guaranteed, has a physical dialogue of some sort. We're in a world that today, people aren't toiling, just laboring. They're going to gyms, or they're doing Pilates, or they're doing yoga. So, right, everyone has these things. And people can be trained to have great breath. But the game eventually is you have to have a good open mind, right? So let's go through the 3 soils, okay? Bottom floor. Soil of the bottom floor is gardening. It is your whatever it's called, your eating, how you digest food. It is really the fertility of eating. Eventually, when we train you on your glands, that gland that really you identify with floor in with the first floor agricultural narrative, right, is your spleen pancreas. Your ability to think, chew, ponder, eat, exercise good judgment. Okay? So if you're a car, that is knowing how to put the gas in the tank. Right? And anybody who drives cars knows they actually write what grade gas you should put in the tank. Because if you put the wrong grade gas in your tank, eventually your car doesn't run as efficiently or as well. And it is something that you are in great control of. So remember, you're in great control of what you eat, right? And so because everyone wants control, it's very neurotic for people, right? Because it's always neurotic. So, if you play with the spiritual narrative, you'll be starving yourself, you'll see God, but the problem is that your body will fall apart. If you're doing it from body narrative, you starve yourself because you've got a dysmorphia in the body dialogue, and you think you're supposed to look a certain way, which nobody looks that way, right? So whatever it is, bottom floor is that discernment of eat well, right? Feed yourself well. Right? Be attentive to the fact that you can. Okay? Second floor field, playing field, play well, right? Learn the rules on the playing field. So a lot of when you learn the diamond body, I can teach it to you as baseball, because it's a playing field and you have to know the angles, how to play with others, what position you're in, right? What the goal is. So anything you get done belongs, in a sense, playing field. Right? But of course, because everything is so mutually interdependent, and this is, when we talk about it as you're one thing, you're a cake. And if you're a cake, once you're baked, you don't take the eggs out. You can't take the eggs out. So you can't separate the way I'm separating. I'm giving you all your ingredients, right? But eventually, remember, you can't just pull out the eggs. It's in all parts of you. Your soulfulness, your spiritedness, your mindfulness, right? So I just want you to organize it and know first that the big magic of yoga, or I think of Katonah, is your ability to play with the metaphor, right? And the reason you want to learn to play with the metaphor is because the metaphor is not personal. And once it's not personal, you have a much better ability to open it, right? And to understand something. When things are personal, it's personal. It's about me, right? And so I have learned also with pain, which makes things hard, is nobody else feels your pain. So no matter how intimate you are with somebody else, when it's personal, it's yours, right? And you can talk to somebody about their pain, but it's not your pain. If someone else has a headache, you're not having the headache. Even if you're empathizing and giving them stuff, right? So bottom floor, we're going to play with feed yourself properly. Second floor, we're going to teach you how to play well, right? Which is, and as we said, what would that field be called? It'd be called the playing field, right? And third floor is the mind field. And the mind field is known for Buddhists as the Buddha field, right? And why do you meditate is to make yourself available for seeds from the universe to drop into the mind field, right? So when you cultivate your soil, then you make it available for seeds to take root. So remember, nobody comes up with a thought. If you open your mind, seeds will drop in. Now, if you cultivate your mind field poorly, pretty disgusting seeds come in, like the weed seeds, and then you spend a lot of time weeding, right? But eventually there's a trick of knowing how to weed out, how to know what you want to grow. So on the first floor, remember when you go to the supermarket that they sell you a lot of junk, right? And it's your job, right, to know that packaging is amazing. And I love packaging, so sometimes I buy stuff only for the packaging, right? But you're not being asked to be, to be good. You're being asked to be powerful. And it's very powerful to go to the supermarket and be able to, how much money do I have in my pocket? How many people do I have to feed? How much can I buy my M&Ms? What happens if I overeat this and I undereat that? So all that processing, right, gives you an opportunity to understand the mystical narrative in the most base game of in the body. So they serve you a lot of junk, right? And it's your job to know, don't buy too much of the junk. But it doesn't mean don't buy some junk, right? It just means know what junk is and know why you buy junk, right? And but also know you need meals, right? So it is your job, right? Second floor, it is your job, right, to know the rules of the game. It is your job to start knowing what position am I playing and what does that position mean, okay? So, and then on the third floor with an open mind, it's your job to figure out, what am I thinking, right? What garbage do I put in my brain, right? And that's why eventually once you find something you love, it's amazing how you'll put a lot of that in you. So, be very cognizant that you can, and that is the goal. So the goal of yoga is not to be good. It is not to be colonial. It's not to be patronized. It is to become powerful. Okay? So real yoga is about the great cities, and siddha is the singular, and siddhi is plural. But a siddha means a power, right? And the great powers are incredibly pragmatic. Can you see what is going on? Can you hear surround sound? Right? So seeing, you're going to learn, is very linear but reflective, and you can see angles, and that's why the diamond prism is very, based on a nervous system and the ability to wire and to see, to become luminous, right? So the goal of all these practices is very practical, right? And so this one I like to say, the mystical is practical, and the mystical is the norm, not the exception. So it is the rule that life is mystical. It is the norm that it is amazing. It's just amazing that bees, are designed to fit certain flowers, and that your hand is designed to hold onto your wrist like a log and a bird, right? So there's going to be poses where you make different contacts, but each contact is revelatory when you start understanding that you can, right? You can make the contact that gives you this. You can make that. You can do this. And why bother? Because eventually the goal of all practice is to be safe, is to be concentrated and radiant, and to not lose the mind. And then put it all together, and in the Western narrative, that we call put it all together and individuate. So Jung spent a lot of time studying all of this material, and nobody's coming up with anything new. They just filter through their age and the soil and what can sell until eventually you're getting your seed packet, right? So when I play with people, I'm always checking the minefields. What's in their meadow? Like, what do they grow? Right? And nobody's lying. Everyone's giving themselves away. Just like, and this is why when we do body reading, it's the pleasure of realizing that you're not doing it to be perfect or to hide your issues, right? You're now in a baking class where you're going to bake a cake again. You're going to bake the cake again. So each time we know we're starting with, a set of ingredients, and we see how you baked it, right? Then it's really the joy of saying, it's too dry. What do I do this time? Right? Or it's so moist that it got eaten in 2 seconds. Well, that'll get a big applause. You probably get the prize, right? But, you want to know how to find the big magic in everything, right? So how to make it magical, right? Feed yourself properly, learn how to play well, right? And fertilize your mind. Yeah. So that is going to be really what we want to play with, right? Is those are the 3 main games. So if you've learned Magic Squared also, let me just go some Magic Square stuff, because my job is to all this stuff out. Then you'll get real practice, right? And it'll all be put in there. But let me tell you a couple of fun things to know about Magic Square. And if you've never heard of it, you will, right? But if you want to visit America, you go to the gas station, you get a map of 50 states, at least in the old days. Because today now we have MapQuest and we have satellite dish. And so now you track your GPS, right? You can plug it in, right? And when you decide to go someplace, well, the first thing to go and figure out is, do I need a map of France? Do I need a map of America? Do I need a map of South America? So what map should I buy? Right? Well, you want a journey in your embodiment. So we're going to give you a map of being in a body. Okay? It's a map. There are 9 states. Right? So much easier, right, than America. 50 states. Right? So 9 states. So you have to really know there are 9 states, and the 10th state is the whole. Just like, there's kicking, stroking, breathing, but it's you swimming. Right? So in the end, we have 10 states. And we're eventually going to teach them to you as the 10 digits, because those are your 10 states. And, you know that when you're visiting America, eventually you build a kind of map in your body or in your brain that lets you know East Coast, New York, West Coast, California, Middle America, somewhere between the two, right? Down is, Florida. Up, we eventually hit Canada. And lay of the land. Okay? So when you learn a Magic Square, which is really a great thing to know, now I'm just going to segue off very quickly on that. All yoga, right, makes maps, right? It's just that a mandala is a map. A yantra is a map, right? When people are making mandalas, they're mapping space, time and space. So the tradition is very old to understand that MapQuest is the transcendental experience, because you rise above being in the car and driving, and you can see the lay of the land. It's a huge meditative tool. So when people journey, right, they come back, right, and they've had an experience. Well, if you've been someplace, you can map it. Right? So that's a known. And that's why the minute somebody went across America, right, and visited the West Coast, well, and they come back, they can make a map. It might not be that accurate, but if it's a good map and somebody follows it, they'll come back and say, that map is accurate enough. Now, some maps, just like some in the old days, MapQuest put you on the train tracks, right, which is not a good map. Or, they'd lead you right? But there are a lot of great maps. So you have to know there are a lot of great maps. So I use that map. Okay, the map I start with is known as a 3x3 magic square. Before I map people on, it's called the low shoe turtle. It's also known as the 3x3 magic square, magic constant 15, because there are lots of maps. This is known as the Saturn map, hello, but there are also Jupiter maps and solar maps, and eventually we'll get really fancy. That once you have a map of New York City, well, we're going to give you cellophanes with overlays that give you the map of the subway system in New York, right? Well, it's just as you might need that map much more than you need the highway map of New York, but it's still New York, right? And its job is to keep giving you enough layers of understanding that when you find the only way I'm going to get to Lincoln Center is by the subway because all the roads are closed, that you can find a subway and you can read the map, right? So MapQuest, map reading is a very big piece of all yoga practice. So I want to say, because otherwise people think it's new, but I want you to know it's not, right? Everybody's always trying to get oriented because life is disorienting. So, map of the body, okay? Easiest way to map your body, right, is first divide and conquer, right? So as we said, we have 10 digits we're going to divide this whole body in. Bottom, middle, top. We started with that already. Bottom is swallow it. Middle is radiate it, articulate it, sing it. And top is process it, think it, direct it, right? So bottom, middle, top, right? Because the biggest trick of Katonah, I think, is metaphor. Think of a swimmer, kick, stroke, breathe, right? So if we want to jump to reading a body, right, every swimming coach knows how to read a body. They stand above the pool, they look at 5 people swim that pool, and they see that one's kicking too hard. That one doesn't stroke. That one's head's above water. That one can kick, stroke, and breathe and keep a sight line, right? Eventually, you always need to see what's the technique. Because 2 things about technique. One, it shows you where you are, and the other thing is you can be taught. Which is the big magic, right? Is that you always start exactly where you are. And that's why it's very magical to be someplace, because here I am. Now, everything that got you there, I'm really not interested in. But I'm also smart enough to know that I know how to see where you came from. And this is the trick, to see where you came from. If you are driving to 12 o'clock and you look at the rearview mirror, you're always going to see 6 o'clock. If you're driving to 1 o'clock and I look at your rearview mirror, you're always going to be seeing 7 o'clock, right? If you're driving to 11 o'clock and you look at the rearview mirror, you're going to get this vantage, because you're in the center of it, of over there. Well, I know what that territory is because it's on the map. Behind you on the left, behind you on the right. Remember, we have a map of embodiment, right? So the first trick to know is you've got a bottom, you have a middle, you have a top, okay? Bottom is stability, middle is competency, and top is head above water and imagination and vision and directive, okay? That's one way to divide you. But of course, it's still flat, and we're going to, the way to say that is the menu is not the meal. And first, we're going to teach you how to read a menu, but keep in mind that the chicken that you're reading is not the chicken, right? It's language. But if you can read that chicken and you can read all the description about what that chicken is cooked with, you have much more choice if you want to buy it. And so all we're looking for is power, and you have power when you have choice. And not only do you want to know how to read that the menu says chicken, you want to then read the price. And that's why it's very important to know number literacy. Now, I'm just throwing a lot of stuff out because that's what I get to do, right? But I don't teach my practice in I don't teach a Chinese practice or Chinese theory, even though I learn a lot of that material. And the reason is that I'm not Chinese and I don't speak Chinese. And because I don't, I would never have enough insight to be able to be a great Chinese chef, right? And unless I really decide to devote my life to move to China and learn Chinese cooking and really make that leap into sort of a different narrative, right? I also can't do it through the Kabbalist practice, even though I'm very familiar, because everyone comes from someplace and everyone has been hungry and everybody's learned something, right? And then, in some ways you learn what's available to you. So, it's not that you're picking so much as, oh, it's that time and that's in the air and I can get the insight from that. But I don't speak Hebrew. And because I don't really speak Hebrew, I don't own that magic, right? But I know numbers 1 through 10. And if you can speak the language of numbers, you can own that magic. So that's why, when somebody says, where does it come from? It comes from numbers, and everyone's playing numbers, right? So number coding is a game, right? Everybody always played magic squares. Before there were computers, people were always playing games, card games, game theory, right? I can show you how to take this magic square and break it down into a card game, right? At which point, this is what we've been playing with, that if you know any of it, say you want to get to the number 7, right? And all you have to do is go to our charts, our maps and charts, and go online or, find our stuff and look up what does 7 mean, right? And for us, and it's not just pulled out of notebook, it's like saying, what does spring mean? Well, it's pretty big, but it also does not mean snow, right? So you have to know eventually you're going to get enough maps that overlay that you're going to get even more information. Oh, right. The overlay of the subway system, the overlay of the bus system, the overlay of the, of the maps in the museum. Then you have a really good feel of what is going on in that territory, right? So when we're playing all this magic and number game, it is so that you have your fluency and your literacy and that you know certain things. So one thing to know is you're trying to get to 7. Right? And we say that 7 is the right hand, 7 is the office, 7 is when you go out and you learn to make your deals. You don't make your business deals with your left hand, that belongs to the heart. You make your business deals with the right hand, right? Just like saying East Coast, this is what's happening, that's the heart side, right? But West Coast is the liver side. And so there's a lot of innocence over here, but there's a lot of experiences over there. So when we play with 7, we're playing with techniques that you've learned to handle things. We're playing with the office. We're playing with the business deal. We're playing with a lot of what goes on as the sun is setting. Experience. Out in the world. Right? Go west. Hitchhike out. Right? Where the east, it's like, oh, my heart. My feelings. Sun is rising. When you want to have a great breakfast, do it on the east side. Great light. When you want to have a great dinner, do it on the west side. Night light. Right? So you have to know what's where and how to use things. So say you're trying to learn techniques, which is what handling is all about. Well, if you look at your map, eventually you can get there by 5 and 2. Know your center and know your goals. And put those together, they add up to 7. Right? So I play math games that way. If that's not working, that I know my goals, right? I know what I want for my future, 5, and I know what I want in my memories and, what I want for my future, that's 2. And I know that it's all about me because 5 is me in the center and it's about me, right? And my techniques and how I'm going to get the applause, right? Well, say that's not working. That you're just not getting to 7 with 5 and 2, which is the job you want, or the money you need from the world, or the contact out there. Try 4 and 3. Okay? Right? So 4 is now know what you want for your future, and 3 is put your heart in it. It's a different route. Okay? Say you're not getting there with 4 and 3. 6 and 1. Right? So this is one reason to learn your numbers. Right? How am I going to get to Ohio from New York? Well, you're not going to go through California, right? Because, well, you might if you decide you want a round trip around America and you have a couple of months. But this is why you have to factor in everything. And so how do you win? You do everything. How do you win? You learn to measure up. Okay? So that's why I stick to the numbers. Your job is know something, know anything, and then use that to guide you to understand what you don't understand, rather than struggle with what you don't understand and try to guide yourself with what you don't understand. Okay? So if you know swimming, So in the old days, I would teach all these guys up here. And, they weren't interested in the mystical stuff. They just wanted to know how to fix their rotator cuffs, right? Because they're golfers and, and once your rotator cuff goes, your swing goes, right? And playing the game, and they love to play the game, and it's part of also the business is playing the game, because they go golfing with their partners that they're going to eventually schmooze and make their business. So it's a very big thing to be in the game. And so they would come and they sit there and say, my rotator cuff, and I said, get a kickboard. And they look at me and say, but, and I'm going, get a kickboard. Then they say, well, don't you want to see my MRI? I'm going, absolutely not. I'm not a doctor, right? And I'm not being paid, and I don't know enough because that's not my field. And why would I set myself up to be a doctor when I'm teaching yoga. I'm not a doctor. You have to really know these things. So then you need the right metaphor. So I said, listen, if you use a kickboard, you learn to kick. And then you'll stop stroking so hard. So now we go through the fact that you don't damage your weakness, you damage your strength. And that's why don't believe a lot of crap. Don't believe, as we said in the supermarket, that just because it's well packaged or it's pretty, that honestly that is going to be what's going to feed you. So something to know is that what you break is always your strength. And why do you break your strength? Because you needed to use it. So there are weaknesses, there are reasons why if you have a good mind, you're going to overload it. And there are reasons if you're really competent, you're going to just work so hard and produce. And there are reasons when, you don't feel safe that you become competent, right? But you don't just become competent, you become competent because you're realizing I'm not kicking and I better get there. So our job is to make it so reasonable that eventually you have a reason to learn to do what doesn't come natural. Because what comes natural does not mean it's the best. It's just where you start. Okay? So let's talk about the second trinity. So the first trinity is bottom, middle, top. And you can divide up a story, bottom, middle, top. You can divide anything up, bottom, middle, top, right? Beginning, middle, end, right? And of course, once you start going for the critiquing, well, somebody who's very literate and read lots of stories knows if the story is well written at the beginning, well written in the middle, and has a good ending. And some stories don't. Some stories are great at the beginning, then they fall off. Some stories you have to really trudge through the first 200 pages, right? But only because somebody you love told you to do it, right? Because otherwise you throw it out. I have learned tricks. If I really hate a book, I read the last chapter first. No, because it's mine, and it's my life, and why not? It's not like, I can't. It's not like, so I bought it already, right? So I'm very good at knowing if I'm bored, I skip, right? Until then if I'm really bored, I read the end and see, do I want to? Then if it's really good at the end, I go back and read the whole book again because now it's nothing, right? Because I already know what's happening. I don't like the anxiety of spending a lot of time doing something I don't like, right? Or wasting my time. So you have to find all these games, right? So one game is know your numbers, right? So we're starting with trinities, right? Bottom, middle, top. The next big trinity that defines the 10 states of being in a body is left, right, center. Okay? So left we call the east side, right we call the west side, and center, third eye, third hand, third foot, nobody sees, right? So we can just divide, you have a left hand, you have a right hand, you have a third hand. You have a left eye, you have a right eye, you have a third eye. So we're dividing your pie in trinities because when you play with one, you're playing with a hole or a pinhead, right? So the whole planet or me. They both defined as a one, right? When you play with two, you're playing with a line of communication, right? So that's like a tightrope. It's very edgy. It is the line. When we start playing polarities, you're going to start knowing that polarities are always edgy. They're two ends of the same stick. So one way of understanding polarity is pencil and eraser. Another one is the paddle and the holding, but one side doesn't come without the other, okay? But once you start playing trinity, you're playing for mediation. And all yoga is based on trinity. Mediate, modulate, manipulate, put yourself in the middle, right? So there's no difference from being the mediator, the modulator, the manipulator. It means the same thing. It means you handle. Right? So the right hand handles the world, left hand handles the feeling, and third hand is the steering wheel. And the steering wheel does not handle itself. And that's why nobody sees the third eye. Nobody sees the third hand, right? But it's the third thread that you're playing that eventually you can make a nice braid. So in Sanskrit, they play with the gunas, the 3 gunas. It's the same thing. You want to make a braid, 3 strands. Right strand, left strand, third strand. And when you braid it, eventually you get the 4th principle, which is the braid. So kick, stroke, breathe, and then the whole thing. Okay, left side, right side, center. Left side is basically inheritance. When we're talking about your left side, we don't really mean the left like on the paper of the menu, right? We're talking about in every fiber of you, there's this twine material that has one piece of it is inheritance. So we define that as left. We also define that as belonging to great nature, right? Because you don't grow because you work for it, you grow because you are part of, right? You don't have blue eyes because you decide to have blue eyes. You have blue eyes because it's in your genetic makeup, right? So one piece of you is you come from a gene pool, you come from a stock, right? You're flavored, right? And the side of the flavoring, we always call that the side of 8, 3, and 4. Just like the East Coast, we can define it as New Jersey, New York, Vermont. I mean, there are more states, but we're only talking about 9 states because bodies, you didn't buy a map of America, of 50 states, you bought a map of a body, right? And the map body, we're going to play 9 states of being, okay? So on the left, we call it your inheritance, right? On the right, we call it your education, your world. So, and then in the middle is your soul, spirit, and mind flipping out, going, oh my God, here I am in this body, and here I am living in this neighborhood in this time in the world, right? So that's a trinity that you have to sort of wrap yourself around, is that everyone's given a body, everyone is an inheritance, everyone gets an education, and you have to figure out, they're right there, what am I going to do with it? Yeah. So, easy way to say it, because I'm trying to show you how it's so basic once you understand your metaphors, and that's why, once you understand why you measure up to bake, right? You go, oh, what's the biggest difference between magic and luck? Consistency. You're lucky when you make a cake well once. It's magical, but you can always make it. Well, no magician doesn't have a spell book, right? Because everyone has recipes, right? So masters with recipes is how the Chinese call their wu-wei masters, right? If they were women, it'd be, housewives with recipes, mothers with recipes, cooking, right? But they're recipes, and once you get that, you can use these recipes, well, you can change a certain amount of game. Okay, so the left side is your inheritance, the right side is your world, and in the middle is you figure out, how do I deal? Right? And so when you braid yourself in the base, you're figuring out, how do I find my tenacity and feel safe? When you braid that one in the middle, you're playing with, your techniques to not unravel, and great techniques. And on the top is, how am I not going to lose my mind? And that's why you have to learn great techniques and you have to feel safe. Okay? So left, right, center. A nice way to say it is your inheritance. You have the DNA, or rather it's hardwired that you can learn to read. It is in your genetics, right, that you can be taught to read. You can't be taught to fly without a plane, but you can be taught to read in all different languages, right? It is the first great epiphany that eventually you're taught. So if you want to know the first great transcendental experience that most of you have had, right? You're at a restaurant and they give you a menu, and your parents are busy, they're fighting or canoodling or doing whatever, or not paying any attention or being busy, and you're staring at this menu, and eventually you figure out that CHICKEN spelled chicken. You pulled it off the page. It's very mystical. You took something that is flat, two-dimensional, and you bumped it up. You took it off the page. Now, I can't take Chinese off the page. So just because I'm not literate in all languages, but I can take English off the page. Well, it's huge. It's huge. That's your first literacy. And once you get that, the world opens, because now you've played with first nature and second nature. I have it in my DNA, and I got it. Now we play with third nature. You start going to the library and figure out what you want to read. because that is what's going to change you, right? Not that it's in your DNA and not that you can learn to read. It's that now you start to say, I want to learn about blah, blah, blah. 10 years later, that is in you as much as your DNA and the fact that you learned to read. So this is that twining game of first nature, second nature, third nature. So now we've divided you up into bottom, middle, top, which is basically body is bottom, middle is breath, so spirit, and top is mind. So the first division is mind, body, breath. Second division, right, is inheritance, education, and what you do with it all, right? And remember, nobody can be polar because you're not twisting two braids, you're playing with three. It's me handling my education, me handling my inheritance, and then you see when you start making a braid that they all switch positions, right? So at one point, the center's on the left and the center's on the right is on the left, because eventually you can't take the egg out of your cake, but you want to know these are your ingredients, and it's really how are you going to learn to blend it, to whip it, to produce it, and then to critique it, and then know it's not a judgment. It's so that eventually the next cake, you know something. Because eventually, that's all it's about. It's really how do you develop your ability to know something that you need to know. So I write to myself, my little notes. And one of my notes recently was about if I'm not getting what I want, I know it's me. Okay? So there's two parts of that. One, either I'm wanting something I don't really want or need, or I don't know something. So how do I learn something I don't know? With a map, because a map lets you transcend what you know and see a bigger picture. Never drive to Cleveland if you've never been there without a map. But with a map, you can find the territory, right? So learning how to read the maps after you're literate is really a very big game. That's why you're bumping up your ability to play with transcendental experiences, to build the dimensions of reality. So now you have 6 divisions: bottom, middle, top, which is mind, body, breath. And then you have the division of inheritance, education, and a soul, spirit, mind, that's figuring out how do I handle it in this containment. So that's 6. Now we add 3 more because I'm going to build up an Enneagon for you. Potential. There's something in front of you. Memory. There's something behind you. And presence. The moment. So now we add time. So there are 3 states of time, 6 states of space. Okay? So now you know the states of your narrative, right? And you know the states of your country, right? Just like someone who lives in America knows the 50 states and where they are and that different things are happening in them. But in all states, they're driving cars. In all states, there's the railway systems. In all states, you have to, they're all together, right? But on the other hand, it's also divided because, you can sort of divide, but eventually it's organic, so it doesn't really divide up the way an artifact does. But like a cake is organic, doesn't divide up the way a car can. A car, you can take the spark, each piece apart again, right? But the cake you can't. So a person you can't. But you have to know these are your ingredients. So every one of you is dealing with your soul peeing your pants. Every one of you is dealing with a spirit that wants applause. And every one of you, right, uses a mind. We have to question, what are you thinking, right? So, right, every one of you is given an inheritance. Every one of you is given a world. And every one of you is given a golden thread that figures out, how do I deal with all this? And then every one of you has a potential. And every one of you has a memory. And every one of you is in the moment. Okay? So I like to think of the moment as traversing the George Washington Bridge. Everybody comes from different places and they finally get on the bridge in New Jersey. And then as they're crossing over, everyone's on the same bridge. So when you're in the now, you're on the same place, on the bridge. But when you get off the bridge, some people go upstate, so it's only when you're on the bridge that you're in the same place, right? Which is why when you want something, you have to show up because it's always in the now. right? And that's why yoga practices are really about the now. What shoe are you wearing now, right? How are you organizing the pose now? What do you think now, right? And that's really, it's a great advantage because in some ways, everything you think got you to here isn't really true. All you have to do is go back and look at some old pictures when you were a kid that somebody else stored that you haven't seen in 30 years, and you will not remember anything. Really? I was there? Well, you base your whole story on the stuff you do remember, right? Which is really not all of it. And then when you find out that really you were lied to, or that you forgot 5 years, you remember these. So the memories aren't as important as the now. And that's why all we really care is tune your instrument now. Learn how to play well now. So you now have basically your concept of your magic square. You know that there's going to be a bottom, and we define the bottom once you know your chart is 618. You have a middle, 753, and you have a top, right? 294, right? On the East Coast, it belongs to 4, which is the vision of your future, 3, which is your feelings and heart, and 8, your kidneys being stuck in a body, right? Now, eventually, you'll be able to break these codes on your own, just like you understand letters that you can put it together and you're not sounding it out anymore, right? So eventually you'll understand why, the east side is where the heart sings, the west side is where the liver looks out, right? When you're playing with the heart, it's like a button, it's popping out. But when you're playing with the liver, it's like a buttonhole, toning in. When you know how to put a button in the buttonhole, then you can figure 8, right? And then have that safety of knowing that it works. So we're going to do that with your poses, teach you how to button up, teach you how to have tenacity, and teach you how to use your mind and see which one you're overloading, right? And which you're not. Formulas, because I'm just playing to give you information today. Some fun formulas. In survival, bottom floor, right? The best game is foot to the pedal, kick butt. Right? So you want to survive, room 6 is virility. Your foot to the pedal, right? And eventually when you start knowing, that you can divide any piece of the body into the bottom, the middle, the top. Left side is always the pinky side, right side is always the thumb side, and the middle you can't see, but it's third eye, third hand, third foot. So I'm just going to jump for a minute and come back to this. If you want to know what a cake tastes like, and you're a cake, each one of you is a cake, right? If you want to know what a cake tastes like, you don't eat the whole cake because there are other people and they want some of the cake. So what you do is you get a tranche, right? And a tranche means a triangle because everything's about triangulating, right? So all religions know trinity, right? So you get a tranche, and a tranche in French means a triangle. So if you have a round cake and you want to find out or have a slice of cake, you don't take the outside of the cake, you don't shove your spoon in the inside of the cake, you take what's called a slice, which would give you a piece of the inside, a piece of the outside, a piece of the top, a piece of the bottom. You would have a pretty good slice that lets you know if it's gooey on the inside and dry on the outside. Because if you just take the inside, you might think it's a gooey cake. Or if you just take the outside, you might think it's a dry cake. So it gives you that ability to access the bottom, the middle, the top, and the left, the right, the center, right? And time, right? The potential, which is on top, the memory, which is on the bottom, and everything you want to eat on the inside. So in a body, what would be a slice of a cake? Hand or feet, right? 2 easiest slices of the cake, right? Because it's connected to the very deepest part going in. It also is all on the surface coming out, the top of the cake, the bottom of the cake, and then the inside of the cake, right? So eventually we fractal it all out that you understand what every piece of you is doing, every other piece of you is doing too. And that's when you learn how to do one thing, it will eventually give you lots of things. And that's why the goal is to keep bumping up your dimensions so that eventually lots happening at the same time. Right? Kick, stroke, breathe, head above water, sight line, and you know, oh, I've individuated and I can swim across this ocean. Okay? So let me say one more thing, then I'm going to give you a break for 5 minutes, and then we're going to do a breathing practice. Then you get to eat. Okay? Then you get to really work hard, right? Because that's not my job. My job is just to do this bit for now. Okay. One thing that everybody likes to teach initially is the idea of the 3 principles. Because remember, we're always playing with Trinity. And I want to break down Trinity for you guys because let me break down Trinity for a minute, because you already know that Trinity means mediation, right? So if right hand is the hot water tap and left hand is cold water tap, third hand goes, how much hot, how much cold? Sometimes you need more hot, so you go this way. Sometimes you need more cold, you go that way. So that is the discernment that nobody else sees, that you're manipulating. You're mediating the polarities, right? So that is what it means to mediate polarities, right? There are 9 mediations you're playing with, because you have to mediate the state of embodiment. You have to mediate the state of your spirit. You have to mediate the state of your mind. You have to mediate the state of your inheritance. You have to mediate the state of the world, and you have to mediate the state of yourself, right? So, right, you have to mediate the states of time. Right? So there are 9 great mediations, there are 9 great states, the number 9. So you have to sit there and go, why is the number 9 so important? Right? Just like eventually when you learn this magic square, the magic constant is the number 15. 15 means Trinity. It means right hand, 5 fingers, left hand, 5 fingers, third hand, 5 fingers, 5, 5, 5. It means 3 times 5, 5 times 3. And you're playing with Trinity, right? So 15 is the symbol of Trinity. 9 is also part of Trinity. It's 3 triangles, right? Right. So the Sri Yantra is the same vibration as the magic square, right? 5 upward triangles, 4 downward triangles. This one you're playing with 9 squares, but you're playing there with 9 triangles, right? Because you're vibrating out, mediating the bottom, mediating the middle, mediating the top, mediating the left, mediating the right. So it's a map. And once you read the menu, you go, it's a menu of 15, right? Or it's a menu of 9. Now, if I go to the 99-cent store, everything costs 99 cents. It means something, right? So you have to know, what does 9 mean? I want to give it to you one other way, and that's in music. When you play music, you learn how to read the score. And really what I'm teaching you is how to read a map, right? Well, the score of music is a map, right? And the body of the score is 5 lines, 4 spaces, 9 places to put the notes. There's a reason, right? So we know that 1 means the point or the whole, 2 means the line, 3 means the triangle, 4 means the frame, the square, 5 means crossroads of consciousness in the frame. 6 now builds the dimension, right? So it brings in sects of male and female triangles. Or you can think of it as the hexagon, which is the shape of the beehive, because a beehive in geometry is the shape that nature uses to fit, right? So 2 triangles fitting, right? So it's very big in nature to play with 6. 7 is the bee in the hive, so consciousness, right, in nature, right? 8 is the box, right? So when you're boxed in a body, 8 is a box. So that would be the present, right, the box. But of course you want to open the present and see there's something in it, consciousness in the box. So 9 raises embodiment to that level that something's in that box, right? So that is one way of understanding 9, is you're playing with 8, you're playing with a box, and then something's in that box, right? Another game on it is when you play your musical scale, you're going to play knowing that your scale is a box. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right? But the body of music doesn't stop with the box, because you're not self-contained. So you need notes from above, an octave above, or an octave below, right? So it's played so that you don't just play an octave, you play an octave and. It's always an octave and, right? So music does not stop at 8. It doesn't stop at the embodiment. It's the octave and, right? And that's when you can start playing the music of the great spheres, and you can play 3 octaves, the octave above you, the octave below you, an octave above you, an octave behind you, and then all of a sudden you learn the great symphonies. So one way to teach you all that is we're going to tune your instrument. Your body is your instrument. Your mind is the musician. Your breath is the tone, right? One thing is to play your instrument. Another thing is to note tune your instrument. So this is the theme of the breath practice we're going to do now. So I get to give you that vision, right? There are 2 great visions in classical Nevine, which is classical Taoist, Confucian, Buddhist theory that's codified about 1200 AD. And the 2 great visions, so it's not new. You get to see how long people have been playing these games, right? The first great vision is that you belong to the greater whole. You are part of. Part of like the DNA game, right? That also, right? You're part of, right? You don't make your heart beat. You don't make yourself grow. You grow because you belong to great nature. So you're part of the greater whole. When we talk about the Tai Chi, the definition of Tai Chi is the stem of a cherry. So they knew, right? That you're part of great nature and you are fed by great nature. And if you know how to stay attached to the stem of the cherry, well, you get all the sap. You get all how great nature grows things. So eventually, in personal nature, you have to cut the umbilical cord, right? Because you're going to be the tree when you crown like a child. But in great nature, you're the fruit, and you cut the Tai Chi, right? When you're now ripe, right? And you become a being unto yourself. So the first great vision is you belong to the greater whole, right? The first meditation we'll play with is connecting you to the greater whole. When you connect to the greater whole, right, you're connecting through this crown and glory, right? And what you're connecting to is the universal intelligence, right? So the Buddha field, the great mind, because eventually that's what's feeding everything. Okay? So when you connect to the greater whole, you start with your arms up in the air. Anytime your arms are up in the air, in anybody's practice, you're asking for the universe to feed me, right? So that's why you might not know that that's what they're saying. They might not know that's what they're saying, but that's what's happening. Okay? When you open yourself up, connect yourself to the greater whole, right? That's when you learn all the great polarities of great nature, the great spins, that you are being fed by temperature, you're being fed by seasons, you're being fed by the orbital rotation of time, you're fed by sleeping and waking. This is what makes the string ball. That is really the fruit, right? So it's spinning. And that's when we do the first piece, you're going to be positioned so that you're fed by the sunrise, by the sunset, by the spins of the planet, by temperature. The first thing you play with when you're playing with 1 and 9, which is grace and effort, is temperature. It's the Kundalini, right? And when anybody wants to make a baby, first thing they do is check temperature. Nothing grows until it's the right temperature, right? So temperature is different for different things, and that's why in gardening seed packets, they even tell you what temperature to put it in. Something's going spring, something's going autumn, something's in summer. So it's not arbitrary. So you want this to grow, you need this temperature. You want to bake a cake, 350. You want to, cook something else, 400. You want to just reheat something, 220. It behooves you to understand the narrative temperature and to be the great mediator between it. But great nature only plays polarity. So it's just going to tell you there's up, there's down, there's hot, there's cold, there's winter, there's summer, because polarities belong to great nature. There's life, there's death, but trinity belongs to personal nature. My life, my death, my temperature, my feelings, right? My embodiment, right? So great nature is what we play with first because, take advantage that great nature is feeding you. When you drop off the tree, then you play with the second great vision of virtue, which is that you are being unto yourself. So this is a great polarity. The first polarity is hot and cold. Second polarity is winter and summer, right? Which is outside but also inside. Winter is when you're old. Summer is when you're ripe, right? Spring is when you're young. Autumn is when you're aging, right? So, right, all that, but once it's about you, it's personal, and you're putting that trinity game within it. Yeah. So personal nature is the second game, and that really is the polarity of great nature, right? It's all about me. Nobody else feels my pain. So everybody has pain, but my pain is personal, right? So the second big practice is personal nature, right? And that is the great virtue of knowing. It's known in Vedanta theory as inferior virtue, but it doesn't mean weaker. It just means superior virtue, inferior virtue. It's language. So it means the great virtue, greater whole, and the lesser virtue, which is personal whole. So all of yoga is based on knowing these two visions, that you are part of the greater whole, and that's what you want to tap into, but also you are whole into yourself, and how do you deal? And so then we change our metaphor. The first metaphor is to be a fruit because it's organic and you're a part of. The second one is to know that it's your car, it's your body, it's your house, it's your vehicle, because now you're not being fed by the greater whole, so it's not an organic game anymore. Right? It's a very personal narrative. How do I? So the easiest is, how do I tune my instrument? How do I put the gas in my tank? How do I tend my own house? And that's what all these maps play both. You'll get the big maps of great nature. There's temperature, there's seasons, but then you get the map, my house. Well, your house has 9 rooms, but the house is the 10th principle, which is one house with all these rooms in it. Okay? And in your house, you have rooms in the basement, bottom floor, which is where all the water goes down when you pee in your pants, right? You have rooms in the middle floor. That's going to be the kitchen and the office and the living room where you get things done. And then you have the top floor, right? Where, you have your attic and you have your bedrooms and you have the cupola, right? But the whole house also has the rooftop. And when you go on the rooftop, you can look up and the rain of the universe is coming down on the house because the house does not live separate from everything that is surrounding it. Okay? So the second big practice are always about how do I tune my instrument? How do I take care of my house? How do I handle it all? So in that, I like to say one more thing, and that is that Mahayana Buddhism is very different than Theravada Buddhism. In Theravada Buddhism, it is the monastic Buddhism, right, of really being part of a monastery and being a monk and sweeping yourself so that, in a sense, you're insignificant, right? It is really, learning how to be part of the hive, right? A lot of the reasons why, and yoga really is not asceticism. It's a different practice, right? But it doesn't mean you can't be both games. Just like you can have organized religion, you can have personal religion. But real yoga belongs to personal religion, right? And personal religion, right, is personal time management, right? It's personal ritualizing. So I build calendars for that reason, because if you want to be part of a religion, you show up on their calendar. If you want to own personal religion, you show up on your calendar. Okay? Because remember, it's about personal power, right? So when you learn to tune your instrument, when you learn to read the score, these are the 2 big skills, and then you learn to play, well, now we have that game of soulful, go home and play by yourself. Spirited, play with others, right? How do you know you're playing well? Well, when you get the applause, when you're playing with others. How do you know what to do when you're going home and you're being soulful? Cross-reference your information, right? Right. But you have to put this all together because that's what we were trying to achieve, knowing that yoga is this mystical game of being self-responsible. So in Theravada Buddhism, a lot of the practice saw the Buddha as a teacher, and the Buddha taught the techniques, and they're all recipes and they're all numbers. And the biggest thing to learn when you learn the Buddhist, Eightfold Path and stuff is that term samma, right? And samma is usually translated as right or wrong, but it really means in summation. It has to add up. If all your techniques don't add up, you don't win, right? And that's why measuring up, right? Adding up, knowing the numbers, being able to find out, does it measure up, right, is the goal. Because if it doesn't measure up, you don't win. If your cake isn't well made, it doesn't work. So how do you measure up? Well, you have to know that you're designed with proportions of measure, that, an asana is a measure game. And that's why nobody wants to see your asana your way. They want to see it work, right? So when you have to march, they don't want your version of marching. They want you to march with the right gait, in unison, because it's to build that communal. And so Theravada Buddhism, you're dealing with a very monastic game that is going to teach you, in a sense, that you should learn to measure up, and that piece of it. But the Mahayanas are into the big magic, right? So they like to blow the circuitry a little more and go that, what are you doing it for? It's to see, it's to hear, it is to become empowered. So a normal person's house is wired for maybe 250 volts of electricity, right? And that'll be fine if you're just cooking at home and stuff. But say then all of a sudden you're smitten that you want a restaurant, right? And you now need a kitchen that can bump up the amplitude, right? So now you know that you have to call in people, the electrician, and say, hey, this kitchen has to be now wired for 350, 400 volts, because I can't afford to pop my blender when it's going at the same time as the dishwasher, because there's a lot happening, right? So the goal of yoga for the Mahayanas was to be able to bump up your amplitude of luminosity. So when the Buddha walked down the street, they knew he was enlightened, not because he taught them he was enlightened, but because he was so luminous that it was just obvious that the light was on. Right? So that's a big piece of what we want to do, is build your insulation of your neurology, right? So that rather than a Kundalini blowout, which is when you pop the circuits because you put too much on the amplitude, now you can take your popcorn maker and stuff it in the bathroom and still make the popcorn, right? So it's your job to know, do not blow your circuits, learn how to insulate the myelin, learn how to eventually use your practice to your advantage, which is to become luminous, right? That is the goal of the whole game. In 4 or 5 days, you should have a lot of this in you, because you already have in you, I can divide space into bottom, middle, top, left, right, center, potential, past, present, right? I understand the territory. And now I also know that I don't just read a map to read the big picture or to think that it's flat. It is to help me get to territory. And there's a lot of territory on the map. How do I get to the bottom? How do I get to the middle? How do I get to the top? How do I put it all together? How do I get to the East Coast? How do I get to the West Coast? And because it's a numbers game, it's not very hard, right? Just like literacy, once you're literate, reading is not hard anymore, right? Now it's about comprehension, right? So that's a lot of my themes. All right, take 5 minutes and then we're going to do a practice. Is that right? Yeah, I talk a lot, but I know that you won't get this in the next game. You'll get a much more dynamic practice. It's fun, right? We haven't started, but we will start, right? And it's so basic, you'll be shocked how much you already know. Because everybody goes to the supermarket, everybody wants to play. Yeah. Don't make it so hard that the language stops you. So if you just talk about chakras, it's hard to realize they're musical notes, right? Or they're glands, or they're the ingredients. I can break all your chakras down into